What's up YouTube, Dal here from Zeph War Games, and today I'm bringing you a very spicy concoction of Dark World Tearlaments. Combining these two decks unlocks additional synergies for both of them, where they're able to trigger each other in order to get into higher level fusion monsters and just more protection or disruption during your opponent's turn. As you know, I've brought to you guys so many Dark World profiles and variants. Some are just for casual fun, some are to be a bit more explored and to create and make your own, and some can do incredibly well, as you've seen from a number of profiles. On top of that as well, it is also our 7th birthday. That's right, 7 years of creating Yu-Gi-Oh content for you guys to watch and enjoy. So thank you so much for every single one of you that has already smashed that like button and hit that notification bell, as long as subscribing as well, because we could not be doing this without you. If you have not done so, please do so to join us on our journey going forward in order to hit 100,000 subscribers and keep producing enjoyable, entertaining content for all of you out there. With all of that out of the way, let's dive headfirst into this spicy Dark World and Tearlaments profile with additional spice. So as the main focus of the deck is Dark World, we'll start right there. So we're going with 2 of the Grapha, 3 of the Rainbow. Again, pretty standard on this lineup with the Gentas and the Snows. Everything here pretty much as standard as you need to. The only change in this version is we've gone for 2 Grapha so that we can also play King of the Swamp as the 3rd, because technically that 3rd will have a bit more synergy between the 2 archetypes, unlocking Kit Kalos and the Grapha fusion as well. We then play the 1 Beige, the 1 Cerulei, the 1 Silver. Now, obviously, the idea behind this deck is it's not to hand loop your opponents. You don't need to be relying on Cerulei as much. Yes, Cerulei is really nice, but again, when you look at the cards that you can be discarding from your hand during your turn to get the most value, you're probably going to be going for a Silver or a Rainbow. The only time you'll ever discard a Grapha is just to kind of try and look at your opponent's hand or look at one random card from their hand. Which, if you do that, you probably want to do it after Silver. The 1 Beige is in here because we do play Fabled Raven. Now, the reason I've put Fabled Raven in here is it is another card that bridges the 2 archetypes. It's another card that allows you to pretty much start triggering your Tearlaments. It can also help you trigger your Dark Worlds. You can always protect your Dark Worlds as they are mandatory, so they'll always be your lower chain links, and that will allow you to then protect with your Tearlaments. Keep in mind as well that your Tearlaments have so much synergy with the Dark Worlds because they can just spin back multiple cards. And what I mean by that is they can spin back themselves plus their Grapha to make the Grapha Fusion Dragon. They can also spin themselves back plus an Aqua Monster in order to make your Kit Kalos. They can then, of course, spin back 2 monsters with the same attribute but different types. So obviously all your Tearlaments are going to be Aquas, bar Rhinoheart, who is obviously a water warrior, and it can then spin back the any of your Dark Worlds because they will be Dark Fiends, and that's going to be able to get you into Mud Dragons, so you're getting more synergy that way as well. Not to mention you can recycle your Grapha Dragons from the graveyard with the help of Dracus Depelia, and not to mention the other cards as well. It's a really cool kind of synergy, and of course on top of that, Fabled Raven will unlock some very spicy synchro plays. I'm going to show you 16 cards in the extra deck, one of which you can choose what you want to take out. You can take out Fabled Raven completely if you want to, but I quite like the idea of if I didn't open up Rhinoheart, and I'm not playing the field spell for the Tearlaments, I could go for Fabled Raven, and I'm unlocking more plays. I've got more of a bridge to trigger both sets of cards, and pretty much go from there. The last kind of card that we play before I move into the dangers is the Zephyros, the Elite. The reason I find this so good is, again, you've got so many ways of discarding it. You can discard it off a Shiren. Obviously, it won't trigger, but you'll be able to discard this off a Shiren and mill 3 cards. If you mill it to the graveyard, it's a very cool way of bouncing a danger back to the hand. It can also be a very good way of bouncing back resource, whether you want to bounce back a Havnis, whether you want to bounce back a extra deck monster that's already been negated, anything like that. You have ways of looping everything back around, so you get to go again. So that's it for the Dark World engine, and then obviously Blackwing Zephyros, the Elite. Moving on to the dangers before I take you through the Tearlaments, because the danger lineup is actually very, very small. Now, I went with a very minimal Dark World engine of 2 Nessie, 2 Mothman, and 1 Jackalope. Now, obviously, the Mothman is dependent on if your locals is full with Tears. If it's full with Tears, you could change this up if you want to. But the idea is I'm trying to go for rank 4 plays. I've gone for the one that will special from the deck, and I've also gone for the one that will search out another copy. I've tried to keep the RNG moment of the dangers down because you're still going to be rocking and rolling with the RNG factor of the Tearlaments. Now, Obviously, as a disclaimer, the better tier element version of a deck like this is going to be tier element with a Shizu, but that's boring as hell. With this, at least it is actually really fun, because what you're doing is you're taking the dark worlds that you enjoy, love playing with, and you're adding in a fusion element. With that fusion element, it gives you more consistency to recycle your graveyard. Yes, you don't always want to be putting Grepher back into the deck, but what it does allow you to do with stuff like Ascension, and of course Fabled Raven, is it gives you ways of controlling how and when you trigger certain tier elements that you open up in the hand. It obviously gives you a very, very good and very powerful route to play through your opponent's turn as well, because you're going to be using stuff like Suliak. You've got Havnis as well, so you've now got your own built-in hand trap for the deck, which is really, really cool. And then on top of that, you're adding in the ability of the Dark World Fusion Grepher in order to discard a card, trigger more effects that way, whether you are discarding a Dark World card or a Tier Element card. And we all know how annoying Tier Elements can do. And it also gives you a very nice and very powerful way of trying to play through certain lines of hand traps and everything else like that. So moving on to the Tier Elements themselves, we are of course playing Triple Shiren. So this is obviously your level 4, pretty much free summon. Now ideally what you want to be doing is you want to be sending your Tier Element monsters off of her effect. The only other card that I would really send, because it doesn't discard sadly, is the Zephyros the Elite. So it is the way of getting to special summon itself. It is a way of getting to be able to trigger Tier Element boards, because you're going to be milling cards as well. So the benefit of milling Dark World cards in a deck like this is by milling stuff like Rainbow and Grepher, they're pretty standard because then you just bounce back your Dark Worlds. But on top of that as well, when you're milling stuff like your generic Dark World cards, you can start spinning them back into the deck. You've got the ability of using something like a Starving Venom Dragon, and that's going to give you a very aggressive push, which will pretty much consistently allow you to put back your tier elements with everything else. But what you're going to be going for more consistently in this deck is you're probably going to be using it to go into stuff like Mud Dragon and Grepher for the Dark World synergy side, and then everything else you're going to go into a Kit Kalos, a Kaleido Heart, and even a Rukalos as well. Triple Havnis, so this is the annoying hand trap. Like, number one, I expect this to get a super in OTS 21, I think we're now on, which comes out in February. And then I also expect this to be one of the cards that gets hit on the ban list, because this card's just stupid. Like, yes, it is very RNG. Like, if you activate this, you summon this, and it doesn't mill anything, it don't do nothing. But if you reveal this, activate it, it hits the board, and it mills stuff, it's just absolutely ridiculous, because it can go like, if you mill 2 tier elements, it just goes and goes and goes. I've then got 2 of the Merlin and 2 of the Rhino Heart. You can, if you want to, put Elf in the extra deck. I kind of avoided doing that. And part of the reason as well that I didn't go so heavy with the field spell, which if you want to, you can put in, is because, again, when you're revealing your danger, you actually want to hit, I'd rather hit a tier element monster than I would rather hit the field spell. Yes, the field spell does give you a bit more presence on the board, but I'd much rather have Gate of the Dark World on the board than the Pearlerino. So you can kind of see the two between it, and obviously Pearlerino is £35 a card, whereas you can technically, if you've already been building Dark Worlds as you go, you're not really adding huge amounts of money into this deck in order to play it, so you can kind of go from there. The last monster we play is King of the Swamp, so this is another bridge between the two archetypes, because obviously this can act as Grepher, but then of course it is an Aqua monster for everything else. And then the final one you got is the one Suliak. So the Suliak is obviously the very important and very powerful negate continuous trap, which can be incredibly powerful during your opponent's turn. Not to mention it allows you to kind of trigger and dance around Dark Ruler, and then it does have that effect that if it is sadly sent through a danger, you get an effect off it as well. So you kind of got to be using everything that benefits itself, and I think the one thing that this version has, opposed to other versions with something like Catalyzer in, is you've got more targets to discard off of a danger, so you're actually increasing the consistency of that as well. And then the final is the generic spells and the Dark World spells. So I've gone with 2 triple tactics. You can swap this out for anything you want. 2 gates, 2 ascension, and the 1 archives. Now ascension is actually really, really good, and the reason I say it's really good is because obviously you can still banish a tier element from the graveyard, but you don't want to be doing that. What you want to be doing is you actually want to be discarding the tier element from your hand. So all you need to be doing is summoning a Dark World fusion monster, which you're going to be doing. And then what you do with that is by discarding a tier element, you'll actually be able to trigger its effect, because it's technically still sent to the graveyard via a card effect, because that's what Dark Worlds need to be. They need to be discarded via card effect, and tier elements just need to be sent via card effect. So it gives you the benefit of everything you need, as well as also trying to push push plays through and push play forward in order to kind of get you everything you need. And that's kind of a really nice synergy between the two decks that works really, really well, gives it everything it needs, and goes from there. And then the final card that is a bridge between everything as well is Foolish Burial. And what I mean by this is you can Foolish Burial a Greffa or a Rainbow if you want to regain some resources for your Dark Worlds. But then of course you can just always Foolish Burial a Tearlaments monster, and then that Tearlaments monster go, cool, I'm going to spend everything back. So just imagine in a growing game, you activate Foolish, like you top deck Foolish Burial, you activate that, you send a Tearlaments, you trigger the Tearlaments effect, you spin that back plus a Greffa in the graveyard, and then that's going to give you your Greffa Dragon. So you've just got loads of plays to keep moving forward. I really, really like it. Obviously, the gate is less consistent, but literally all it does is come off of Genta, and then it pretty much builds itself from that point on. Archives I still really like. A lot of people still hate on it, but, you know, you do you, bro. But keep in mind with Archives, yes, it needs you to discard a Dark World card, but on its secondary effect, you can discard one card and draw 2 cards. So again, it's another way of being able to trigger a Tearlaments and draw in 2 more cards. So, you know, you can see, again, another bit of a mini bridge between the two. Talents is obviously in here, as I've done in previous profiles. Just, it's always quite funny when you go Ceruli, discard Silver, rip your opponent's hand for 2, and then you go, cool, Talents, look at your opponent's hand, rip another one. Obviously, it's not, like I said, it's not about the hand loop, but by doing something like that, you actually get hand knowledge, which is incredibly important, because then you just get rid of their Dark Ruler, and then you push them to be able to not to play. Okay, moving on to the extra deck. So the Tearlaments fusions are pretty straightforward. So the one Kaleido Heart, the one Rukalos, the one Kit Kalos, the one Mud Dragon of the Swamp, and then you got your one Dracus Depelia, and then your 2 Greffa fusions. So like I said, you've got a bit of flexibility in here. You can use Starving Venom. Starving Venom will be a generic bridge between the two Tearlaments and the Dark World, because it just requires 2 Dark monsters. So that is something you can do, but the idea is, like I said, if you've got a Greffa in the board and you trigger a Tearlaments, you're going this way. If you don't, and you've got an Aqua in the board, or you've just sent another Tearlaments, you're going for Kit Kalos, because then you're going to be leading up into a Rukalos, which will then protect all of your future plays from stuff like Nibiru's and everything else you need. Not to mention, it's a very annoying card that both of these cards float. It's just like, yo, really? Just stop coming back to the blooming board. Very, very powerful. I do only play 3 links, and this is what, obviously, I've kind of gone for a very, very big hybrid extra deck, which is why I'm going to show you 16 cards so you can kind of make your decision. But this actually runs every type of extra deck monster. So it is predominantly fusion, but because of Fabled Raven, we can actually run more XYZs and we can run more synchros. But it really comes down to your personal preference. You're like, I want this to only be fusion based. Then arguably you probably cut out the Ravens, you can cut out more cards, and you could go for a branded version if you wanted to. With this, what you're doing is you're utilising the levels of the Tearlaments with the levels of the Dark Worlds for your XYZs. You're utilising the pure board spam capabilities of both decks to use your links. Obviously, Cross Sheep in a deck like this is nuts, because literally if you went Cross Sheep and then you fused into a Mud Dragon, that would then trigger to bring back level 4. That gives you an instant rank 4. Now, obviously, there's a lot of rank 4s we can play in this deck that help both sides of the deck, which is really, really good, and I'll show you them in a minute. Now, the reason I kept Muckracker in this deck, and again, a lot of people are like, whoa, this is a bit of a weird one, is again, I can loop Fabled Raven. And the reason you want to loop Fabled Raven is for this guy right here. So this is where additional spice comes into play, and I'd actually advise playing this in your synchro play version anyway. So this is Groza, Tyrant of Thunder. It was a common in, is it Break is a Shadow? The one that the Dark Magician support coming batch. I can't off the top of my head. Actually, I've got it behind me. Battles of Chaos. Duh, what am I talking about? Battles of Chaos. Break is the Shadow. Lol. So what makes Groza so good is it's 1 tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner Fiend monster. So keep that in mind. It has to be Fiend. So it needs to be made with your Dark World monsters. However, during your opponent's main phase, quick effect, you get to target an effect monster on the field. That is the cost. Discard 1 monster, and if you do, negate that monster's effect until the end of this turn. You can only use this effect of Groza once per turn. If a Fiend monster or monsters is sent from the hand to the graveyard, except during the damage step, obviously through his own effect, you get to apply one of the following effects. Until the end of this turn, this card cannot be destroyed by battle, or it cannot be destroyed by card effects, or your opponent cannot target it with card effects. Why is that so broken? Why is that so good? Well, its discard effect again is a bridge between two art types. It will actually be able to trigger both. Now, obviously, if I use Muckracker to bring it back to loop it to go into Groza, I'm actually going to be using Groza's effect to try and trigger Dark Worlds. Now, obviously, I'm going to be making this during my turn, so I can then use it to trigger the Tearlaments. But what makes it so good, because it discards as effect and not as cost, it will trigger both effects. So if I wanted to, I could technically trigger a Dark World off of this, and then trigger a Tearlament off of this. And if that wasn't annoying enough, you've negated a card, you've swapped a card around, and then by discarding off of this, you've probably looped 2 more cards, and discarding off of this, you've probably ended up going into a Rue Kalos or a Kit Kalos or a Kaleido Heart, and then your opponent's just like, stop summoning during my turn. Very funny. The other synchro monsters you can play is Baron the Flirt as a level 10, and then I've gone with the one Psychic and Punisher. So this is the questionable one. This is one that you can take out, put in. It really depends on what you play. And I actually took out a Baguska for this as well. So I'll show you the last 3 XYZs so you can kind of see everything in one go. So Reader, Dweller, and Daguerres. Now, like I said, there's 16 cards in front of you. You can chop and change depending on kind of how you want to play the game. It was one of the ones where I was like, oh, I really want to play these in freeze. So I've got the fusions that I need. I want to play these in freeze. You could play the Grepher Dragon at 1 if you wanted to. That's entirely up to you. If you were like, oh, I really want to keep all of these, the only one that you go straight away is dropping the Grepher Dragon. The Redo is in here because it just triggers the Tearlament effects. And Redo is just an insane card. Like, constantly stealing your opponent's stuff, getting draws, bounces, everything you need it. Abyss Dweller is pretty standard in this format. Daguerres is another bridge between the 2 archetypes because being able to draw 2 ditches can trigger both sets of cards, which is really, really cool. Psychic and Punisher is just a big boss monster, so that's probably the one where you go, okay, cool, get rid of it. But I just like the way it looks, I like the way it is. That's just personal preference. But yeah, you could cut him. He's just a boss monster that I feel a lot of decks will struggle to deal with going second. Appaloosa is another one you could consider if you wanted to, but you still need like a link monster you can climb up into, so whether that be a Boral Sword or an access code, that's entirely up to you. Like I said, I took Baguska out, but Baguska is another one that you can probably show as an additional option, so it's entirely up to you. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is it for the profile. I've tried to go into this as much depth as I possibly can. So that's pretty much it from the profile. As you saw, there was a lot of different combinations, a lot of different spices, and a lot of different options for you guys to trial out and to see which suits your playstyle the most. Thank you so much for watching. If you do have any questions at all, please put them in the comments down below. I will be more than happy to answer them for you. If you do have any particular type of content that you would like to see as well, by all means put it below and I'll be more than happy to look into it. As absolutely always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe and, of course, happy dueling.